Susan. Today we're talking about a topic it's your topic. You were so excited to put it on our list. And honestly, I knew nothing about it before you mentioned it and did some diving into it. And yeah, I think we have a lot to talk about.
Yes. So we're talking about the Gospel of Thomas today, which is one of my favorites. I don't, feel like anyone should have to choose. But it speaks to me, and it's very different, but it speaks to me in a way that the canonicals don't. Not to diminish the canonicals at all. But yes, it's been one of my favorites, and it's not one that a lot of people are familiar with. In certain circles, it's very popular and well known. But I think in the mainstream, mainline denominational liturgy, doesn't usually make the rounds. It doesn't get in the liturgy over the course of the year. So, yes.
Yeah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Thomas not in the main lineup.
Thomas who? Thomas what?
Yes, I was interested to find out though the source of the phrase "doubting Thomas." I was like, "Oh, this is that Thomas. Got it. All
This
right." Yeah,
Some people think this is that Thomas. Do you know what I mean? Like I have no desire to get into like who wrote what, because I don't care. To me, it's all the inspired word of God. It doesn't matter, you know. But I know that's super important to some people. So
well, and I thought it was just like if it is the same person, it was an interesting reference point for me in terms of like some familiarity or basis of like, oh, okay, I get it.
yeah.
But I'm very interested to hear. I know we're going to talk about kind of the background, but I'm very interested to hear why it's your favorite, because as I read it and then also started to read some of the, I don't know, I wouldn't say criticism, but discussion around it, uh, it's definitely very different
Yes.
than what is included in the New Testament. So
Yeah, for
why
sure.
why do you love it so much?
It speaks to my nature. It has more Eastern influence. So to me, it's more mystical. It's more about awakening and consciousness. And I'm a big panentheist, as you know, and the Gospel of Thomas really speaks to panentheism. And I'm also what's known as a realized eschatologist, which means eschatology is the idea that, heaven's down the road. It's going to be better down, like what is realized eschatology means no, heaven's here and now. And so that is another theme of the Gospel of Thomas, this idea that the kingdom of heaven is not only within you, but it's all around you. And those were beliefs that I felt before I even found the Gospel of Thomas. And so when I found it, I was like, yes, my tribe, so it really, echoed. And again, it's not to say that I don't value the canonical gospels, as certainly I do, John being very mystical in and of itself. But Thomas, you have to put on kind of a different lens, different glasses. It's almost like, Zen koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It's metaphorical, it's mystical. When people come to it and they read it on face value, they're like, what? Make a woman a man? Or if a lion eats a man, like, what are we talking about here? And you have to just put a different lens on it. So just a little context for everyone. So, another one of my passions is first and second century Christianity, which was very plural. There wasn't just sort of one way to believe or come to Christ. And I always think of it like, how many times have we been in a meeting? We're in the same meeting and we walk out into the hall and it's like, we got to do X, Y, Z. And you're like, no, we have to do A, B, C. It's like you can be in the same room having the same conversation and take different things away. And I think that's what I love about first, second century Christianity is there were different interpretations and different takes on it. And, this came out of that same time frame. But we didn't know about it. It wasn't discovered until 1945. People have probably heard about the Nag Hammadi Gospels. So they were found in a cave in Egypt. And this was one of those codexes that were found. And it's basically just sayings of Jesus. And there's, a lot of pushback on it because it doesn't tell the traditional narrative. It doesn't tell the full story from baptism to crucifixion to resurrection. It's literally the sayings of Jesus. So it's as if, you were in a meeting or you were watching a movie, whatever it was, and you just noted down all the sayings. So it gets a lot of criticism because it's not in the same form or structure as what we're used to in the canonicals. But to me, that's like being mad at a bird for not being a fish. They're different things, right? They're just different things. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. You just got to put a different lens on it.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to read it because, you had said it's a lot of, Jesus sayings, but yeah, that's literally all it is. Jesus said this, Jesus said that, bam,
Mm-hmm.
bam, bam, like one
Mm-hmm.
after the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can understand, why the narrative form, uh, to your point of maybe it hadn't been rediscovered, the Gospel of Thomas, or it wasn't as available when some of these decisions were being made. But also I can see how it doesn't fit this walk you, like kind of paint by the numbers, here's the story start to end. It's almost like a companion piece to the Gospels that we have, that are kind of part of the standard New Testament. And then as I started to read it, it is, I mean, it's very metaphorical.
Yes.
You have to really dig in and say, wait, what is this truly saying? Because, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. It is a little, I don't want to say fortune cookie, but it's very metaphorical. And there were pieces where, the kingdom of heaven is here. I was like, oh, I can see why Susan likes this because it does come across as almost a little more, not Buddhist, but more mystical for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Much more mystical. And it starts off, we talked about it is more mystical, it's more contemplative. It's not something you can read quickly and get. It's like you have to read one. Like for me, when I read it all the way through, it's like I'd read one logion or logia a day and then just have to really, really ponder like what's going on here, And interestingly, as I've loved Thomas and come back to Thomas, reading people like Richard Rohr and Cynthia Bourgeois, who play in that more mystical, metaphorical, or, can play there, especially Richard Rohr and his, non-duality push, pushing for unity, which is another big theme in the Gospel of Thomas. It just unlocked it more and more and more for me. And there is a lot of synergy between the Gospel of Thomas and the canonicals, so for those that are looking for that bridge, it's definitely there. But yeah, it's just totally a different take. And, right from the beginning, it literally says these are the secret sayings of the living Jesus, spoken, to Didius Judas Thomas, right? So he wrote them down, and Didymus just means twin. So some people think, oh, Jesus had a twin. No, maybe he was just a twin, like that was just kind of his nickname. Nobody really knows. But funny enough, in Aramaic, Didymus also means balls. So this idea of like twin. So like who knows, right? Like, poor guy, who knows what he had going on. But um
He had a fun nickname that now we just take very literally, maybe. Yes.
exactly, which I think just sort of tees up the whole gospel. But when you take it kind of to a metaphorical level and you take this idea of twin, some people see it as sort of symbolizing the divine twin of consciousness within the believer. So this idea that you are you and you have your personality, but you also have this divine spark in you, and that there's this twin nature going on, and kind of embracing that divine spark inside. So lots of fun ways, to kind of play with the name and who wrote it. And I think it's saying one of the very first sayings, maybe two or three: know yourselves and you will be known, which I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really interesting. So, to the point of, I know you're not as attached to who is the writer as much, but from what I read, it seems that it's assumed he could have been, one of kind of in the apostle realm or a missionary that was around at that same time. And then he traveled east. And
Hmm.
so, he evangelized as he moved eastward to India. And then there's some accounts of him in India where he became a martyr, supposedly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
there's a lot of rich history there.
there is a lot of rich history, and there are, there's Thomas the Apostle, and then whether you believe that that's the same, the church rejected the idea that Thomas the Apostle wrote the Gospel of Thomas. That was one
Mm,
of the grounds. They said it doesn't really have the apostolic lineage that it should have. But to your point, in India, they think of Thomas the Apostle, and there's definitely a strong lineage there, as you just mentioned. But it's also interesting to note that you know some of the older church fathers from first century all the way through to the 5th century, like Origen, some pretty heavy hitters, were often quoting Thomas. So even though Thomas is not well known now and was kind of on the fringes, and the Council of Hippo and the Council of Carthage is when they sort of canonized the final, it took hundreds of years, but finally settled on it. They pushed it out. Thomas has never gone away. Thomas is one of those that, just has a stickiness and a resonance, that lingers, and begs to be read. So, um,
yeah. So, I think this genre difference that it's this sayings gospel, it's 114 sayings just lined up one after the other. And it doesn't have, as you said, miracles or crucifixion or resurrection. It doesn't walk you through these parables. It's not the remedial version at all.
there
It
is
just
no
gives it to
teacher.
you and you get to go figure it out.
And there's no
So,
teacher's manual either, right? There's no
right.
answers in the back kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
So
for sure.
I can see how that would be the way to read it, is to sit and meditate and research on them almost one by one, because, you read it and you're like, what does this mean? I have to think about it. I need to know more.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And another reason that it's not well embraced is it's much more on the kingdom is within you. You have that debate. It's about inner knowledge, and the church is all about what? Outer power and control.
right,
So,
right.
there's a lot of things, and then this idea, of atonement, which is, a very, very overtly communicated message in the mainstream church, is not a factor here. It's more about knowing yourself and inner awakening and finding that divine spark. So, for political reasons, for power reasons, for lots and lots of reasons, it's been on the fringes. And as you said, really, you have to want to read it. You have to work at it. You definitely have to work at it. So,
Yeah, it kind of assumes you already have some insight.
yeah, it is. I don't want to say it's, I mean, at some point it does say for those who have ears to hear, like it, I don't know. I don't want to say it's the advanced course, because that just sounds wrong, but it's definitely.
Yeah, it doesn't walk you through the paces. It's kind of intentionally cryptic.
Hence, it gets the title of Gnosis, right? Being a Gnostic
Hmm.
gospel, and Elaine Pagels is the queen of Gnosticism, right? And she's famous for saying, had the Gospel of Thomas been canonized, we would have a very different church today, if we had a church at all, right? Because it's so dependent on, sort of inner. So I guess I'm just curious. I've kind of gathered here some of my favorite sayings. We could talk about some of the more controversial sayings. We could talk about some I still don't understand to this day. Maybe before I die, I'll understand. So where would you like to start in the conversation? Is there any that jumped out at you that, and I'm not saying I have the answers, so don't expect me to like explain all of these, but.
Uh, well, let me skip through and find this section. Yeah. So let me think through my brain of, I mean, there were definitely some that stood out to me. So I'm interested to hear, what um, the ones are that sparked the most interest for you. I will say that it was interesting to me that some of it seemed familiar and some of it did seem very unique. And so I did a little research, and it's around 30% of the content is unique to Thomas. And then the rest has at least some overlap with the other gospels. And so that was interesting to me. So I tried to focus a little bit more on what was unique to Thomas, and make the male and the female into a single one was
Yeah.
interesting to me. Uh, and to the point of, wow, what do I think about this? Obviously, kind of this idea of spiritual wholeness and integration of all aspects. Um, but it also seems to transcend in a way this like almost like the soul is genderless, right? That there's it's beyond this binary of gender that we live in terms of our embodied experience. So I don't know. Tell me, you've obviously spent much more time with this, but that one definitely stood out to me.
Yeah, well, there's so many different levels. Like you can only imagine, if Jesus is preaching to men and women equally, and the men are like, but you can't tell her she's a girl. We don't tell girls these things. And he's like, "Ugh, then make her a man. So there's context that you have to know and bring to the logia itself. And then there's this idea of duality, right? So duality is not what the kingdom is about. The kingdom's about unity, right? So it's this reinforcement of everything is one. Really, we're seeing duality, but that's not the kingdom of heaven is not dualistic. And everyone shares that same divine spark. And if you believe that the kingdom of heaven is within you, then it doesn't matter if you're male or female, make her male, whatever. They both reflect the kingdom of heaven.
Right, that it's not an issue or a factor.
it, it's silliness, right? Can you just imagine Jesus like, oh, you guys are not paying attention.
Yeah, you're getting hung up on the wrong
Getting hung
things.
up on all the wrong stuff, right?
Yes.
One of my favorites, and I've probably quoted it on the podcast so far, is I'm a big panentheist. And just to remind people, if you're curious, there's pantheism and panentheism. Pantheism is the pagan idea that everything is a god, separately, everything's a god. Panentheism is the idea that God is in everything. There's one God and he is in everything, which is where my heart is. And it's saying 77 is my favorite. I always misquote it, but I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all attained. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me. Right? I'm like, yes, everything is sacred, right? Nothing is profane. Everything is sacred. And that's just, again, something that I felt and I believed. God tells us it's good in the beginning, and I think it's still good, and it's all good because he's in it all.
Yes. I love that. And I feel like there obviously I'm not a Bible scholar. Full disclosure, have not been in a church
What?
service in many years. But there were elements of that that sound and feel familiar to me. But it is stated very clearly in Thomas, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then we definitely get into some, a little bit trickier sayings, like saying 17. I will give you what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no hand has touched, and what has not arisen in the human heart. Right. So this is like a new frontier of consciousness, right? A new way of thinking, a higher level of consciousness. And, one of my favorite sayings, I think it's Albert Einstein, a problem cannot be solved at the level of consciousness at which it was created. And this just grappling with what is consciousness, and how do you get to how do you get to a higher level that transcends where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's, as you mentioned, it's much more geared towards this idea of the thinking the thinking person's gospel in a way versus this emotional salvation oriented approach, and the idea that through contemplation, rumination, study, you're unlocking these perspectives that take you to a higher place. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, you said it at the beginning. It is a little more Eastern, it's a little more Eastern. There are definitely some Buddhist parallels, some Zen parallels, you definitely feel it. But saying 11, one of the ideas of the Gospel of Thomas is be passersby. And I love that. One of the things we say in the Lutheran Church is be in the world, not of the world. That was a Martin Luther thing, right? Um, but saying 11, this heaven will pass away and the one above it will pass away. The dead are not alive and the living will not die. In the days when you consumed what is dead, you made it what is alive. When you come to dwell in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two. But when you become two, what will you do?
This is why it takes a while.
I know.
It's a lot to handle.
It's a lot to unravel, but and it kind of, it's almost Dr. Seussian. You're kind of like green eggs and ham. One day we'd be two, and so it definitely takes. This one's a little bit more poetic. Some of them are like super super straight, but this idea of separation, one versus two, and two versus, like, you have to move away from the illusion of separation. This idea that we are not all connected and not all a part of the same divine spark, the same divine light. We think about life and you think about death. Are they different? Are they really different? Are we two or are we one? Um, it just changes the way you see reality, right? And that kind of like transformation that hopefully takes root and takes hold, like saying 108, whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become that person, and the hidden things will be revealed to that person, right? So there's this union, this oneness, but there's not a loss of individuality, or like I always tell my kids, your body is the part of the universe you've been given. You still have that part of the universe. But it's the idea of that panentheistic, approach. So, honey, I could go all day
I
talking
feel like you could take them one by one. Yeah, and you mentioned the whole, blessed is the lion, which the human will eat, etc., which I stopped me in my tracks because I did not know what to think about that. So I had to do a little bit of research there. But this idea that to truly transform, we have to master our base instincts, kind of our animalistic side,
uh-huh.
and incorporate it into a higher consciousness. So, yeah, it's definitely not easily accessible. You have to really think through these things because at first blush it sounds,
Cuckoo.
yeah, it does. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. A
nonsensical.
little crazy is what I was going to say. Yes.
It
Yes,
sounds
for sure.
nonsensical. And there's definitely Jung definitely took some influence. This is very Jungian, the anima and animus, but exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to conquer your lower self, your base self, and even if the lion consumes the man, that lion still has that divine spark and can overcome, right?
Yes.
And so it's this again, this pantheistic, the kingdom is within you, and even if you fail and the lion eats you, which happens to all of us in different ways all the time, it's not game over. You still have that divine spark in you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yes. And it's to the point you made. It's not future focused. It's not this salvation narrative. It's it's not apocalyptic. It's about the present. So the
yeah,
kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. You know, I don't know. There's a million trite movies that have the line, "You have to look with better eyes than that." I think that's in uh, The Abyss, which is one of my favorite movies. Some people see fear, some people see hope. You have to look with better eyes,
yeah,
and yeah. So there were pieces of this that were much easier to interpret um, and very reminiscent of Eastern philosophies.
yeah,
So I thought that Thomas 61 was interesting. This dialogue with, I don't know how you pronounce her name, Salome, and this idea that true spiritual insight transcends social and gender boundaries. So to your point, like that holiness isn't about sexual or ritual purity, but it's about inner wholeness. That, it kind of breaks social boundaries, that a woman is the one receiving this teaching that is at this high level, and it's showing this inclusivity. Um, and, there were a couple of places like that. The other one that kind of related to that, because I always look with the gender lens. I got to do that.
And I pulled out some feminine themes. I was like, for my friend Erica, I will explore this new territory.
Yes, I love it. The other one that stood out to me along those lines was Thomas 79. Um, uh, Blessed are those who have heard the word of the Father, have truly kept it, for there will be days when you will say, Blessed are the womb which has not conceived and the breasts which have not given milk. And it's this, like, I read that whole section and was like, what? But this idea that spiritual insight is more blessed than this idea of biological motherhood, and often women are venerated for this ability to bring forth life, but it challenges kind of that conventional construct by saying that outside of that, there is this, that women have more value. I don't want to say value, but spiritual insight or spiritual contribution than being a vessel.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Amen. I love saying 59, look for the living one while you are alive, right? Because I'm all like, I think the purpose of life is to appreciate being alive, right? Or the meaning of life, and the purpose is just to spread the light, spread the love, right? Love everyone that you can love in whatever capacity you can love them, right? The Father's kingdom is within you, I think it's saying 113, it will not come by waiting for it. Eschatology, don't wait for it. The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. We're living in the garden. This is the garden. This is the garden, right?
Yeah, and we've talked before about how does that perspective shift alter the way some people would operate in the world.
Right. If that was your guiding lens. And I think it when you see it. You meet these people and they're just vibrating on a different plane. Do you know what I mean? They're living in a different frequency. And that's the frequency I aspire to. It's largely aspiration at this point, but that's the frequency, right? It's just no matter what's going on, that appreciation that it's beautiful. And I don't understand the bad stuff. I don't understand it. But Joseph Campbell would say, is there anything that's really bad or anything that's really good? He challenged that a lot, right?
Okay, so what else are there other favorites of yours? Because I think we ran through a lot of mine that stood out to me. Like I said, things that I thought, oh, I don't remember this from sitting in church for many years during my childhood.
How about this one? Saying two. Okay. This one sticks people. Whoever seeks should not cease seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be troubled. And when he is troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over all.
Yeah, that one, yes. And that's, right out of the gate. You're like, this is not like the rest. Which one is not like the others?
Right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, that this path to, I don't know, I keep wanting to say this path to enlightenment or insight is not without confusion, or, you have to wrestle with some pretty big things. But talk to me more about your study of that.
For me, I have often over the years described myself as a seeker, and just trying to find, I don't want to say the truth, because I don't believe truth is relative, but I think people think truth is relative. I think truth is truth, and we just discover it in bits and pieces over time. But this idea of not ceasing, like I do think that's our spiritual mission, is to seek. And then when you find and you go into this new level of consciousness and you realize, oh my God, this is the kingdom. I am part, like the kingdom is within me and it is all around me. I'm both astonished and troubled, right? I'm just amazed and my wonder explodes exponentially. But I'm also like, why doesn't everybody see it? Why are we behaving like this when the truth is over here? And he will rule over the all. Like that I struggle with because I don't think in terms of like hierarchy and ruling, but I take it more to mean that you'll have an insight or a wisdom that will help you move through the world in a better way, right?
Right.
And my own personal journey over the last several years and being control sober and a lot of these things like collide together, how I see the world, what I believe spiritually, and how I choose to walk through life, has been both troubling and astonishing, and has helped me rule over more. I guess not rule over all, but it's definitely helped me rule over more. Um, and
Well, and it kind of depends on how you think about all, because I think the default is to think about all as other people. But in reality, it can be all of yourself. It can have a lot of different meanings there.
yeah,
And yeah, and I like that you talked about how it can be so parallel, being both troubled and astonished, but also I think sequential when I think about the way that when I've stretched my own perception of the world or of my own spirituality or my inner life, it's often started with something that is troubling to me or that is I don't always have a initial positive reaction to. And because of that, it's interesting to me. Oh, this shakes up my worldview, or this is uncomfortable to me. And what do I actually think about it? And I think, there are two ways to go. There's you dive deeper into that discomfort and start to explore it, or you take a step back and retrench into this is how I've always thought, this is how I'm always going to
yeah,
think.
yeah,
And then if you wander through, sometimes on the other side of it is astonishment, this clarity that you reach about a certain topic or perspective that is, a revelation to you.
yeah, yeah. In Buddhism they talk about enlightenment is the goal, but you have these little satori's, these little breaks where you see it and then you lose it, and then like it's that same, that astonishment can be a satori in a way, right, where you have this like moment of realization. um Another section or another theme that I really love is this, we talked about a little bit, but detachment from worldly illusions, right? And
Yes.
this idea of being a passerby. A couple of sayings: whoever has found the world and become rich, let him renounce the world. Whoever has come to understand the world has found a corpse. And this idea of, being in the world, not of the world, being free of attachment, right? Understanding what matters and what doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think definitely of our billionaires with some of that for sure.
well, I mean,
People who clearly cannot have enough money or material
well,
goods
I,
in their
I
life.
mean, I'm not a billionaire, but I stress over that stuff too.
Sure.
I'm like, oh my God, do I have enough money in my retirement account? When am I going to be able to retire? Like, I need to hoard more money. Like I go to
Mm-hmm.
work sometimes just because I like gotta pay my bills, and so it's just, I think it's a struggle, but to realize this, it's all a corpse.
Mm.
It's just so sobering to hear it. It's really um, sobering. And then I love saying 37: when you disrobe without being ashamed and take your garments and place them under your feet as the little children do, then you will see the Son of the Living One. What? What?
Yeah, I was like, the nudists must love this one.
It's like over all their doorways of their nudist camps, right? But just this idea of stripping yourself of the falsehoods, again, a little bit of the Jungian, right? Getting to kind of the authentic self, and um, returning to kind of that wholeness that is complete without any worldly garb,
Yes.
whether it's clothes or not clothes or whatever. Um,
Yeah, this is a weird aside, but roll with me. I talked to someone not long ago who went through the same experience, but when my father was very ill with cancer and was in hospice, he started wearing less and less clothing the
mhm.
closer he got to death. And he, at the end, did not want anything on him. He would have obviously the sheets pulled up, but he did not want any clothing on him. And I've talked to other people who have had a similar experience with their relatives who were near death, this rejection of clothing. And it feels very symbolic in terms of how you come into the world and how you leave the world. But I thought of that when I read that one.
Wow,
Yeah,
I've not heard that. That's amazing.
yeah, yeah. It's this, to be stripped bare, very literally, but also just without any addition to the form that you are.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So powerful, right?
it is.
So powerful. Do you want to talk about feminine and Thomas? I bet you did your own homework on that.
Yeah, well, like I said, I had to look at those kind of some of those core, you know, there's also a one that's very like, as we talked about this duality of gender, there's women are, more present in some of these. And so, yeah, I'm interested to hear what the feminine aspects that stood out to you.
Well, my brain doesn't go there, so I
Yes. You're like, what will Erica talk about here?
what will Erica want to talk about? So I just did a wee bit of research, the feminine and Thomas, they call it kind of the hidden half.
Yes.
And Sophia as kind of this divine wisdom. I don't have it in front of me, but saying 17, just kind of referencing female, implying Mary Magdalene as an enlightened disciple, and saying 21. So there's physical references to females, to women, that may not get the attention they deserve. And then this idea of gender integration, which just
Yes.
sort of dismisses this idea that women are less than, right? Because again, it's not
Hmm.
about matter matters, but it's about transcending the matter, and the silliness of seeing duality and separation versus that unitive state of consciousness, right? Which is what, the fifth level of consciousness, maybe even the sixth level, final level of consciousness. So, pushing past the silliness of, gender separation into more of a gender integration idea. Uh,
Yes. And yeah, I can't remember which one. I don't think I have it in my notes, but that the one that is about that the male is female and the female is male, something like that. And when I read it, I thought, oh, is this about trans people? What is this about? Like I was so, and then it definitely resonated with this feeling that I've always had that, the spirit uh, transcends beyond, any kind of label or, however you manifest that your spirit is timeless and it is much bigger and less specific than your embodied form.
mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, there's also some bride archetype, themes that kind of run through this a little bit.
Hmm.
Mystical union idea. I don't think it ever overtly talks about, like bride of Christ, like it does a little bit in the canonicals, but again, I wouldn't necessarily expect there to be huge female call outs in the Gospel of Thomas, because that's counter to
Right.
what it's trying to promote, right? It's,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's very egalitarian, it feels like, in the way that women are represented in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And I do, the piece that is, I think understandably off-putting is this, secret, secret saying.
Yes.
And,
Hmm.
you know, my understanding after reading a lot of it and reading a lot of commentary about it, it's not that it's secret as in it's kept from some people. It's just it's a progression, right, of consciousness, that not everybody's pushing themselves to. Everyone's capable of it, but not everyone is going there, in terms of, and that just makes it more secretive because it's not popular. You know what I'm saying? It's not a
Yeah, it's not an exclusive
yeah. Yes.
club. It's not that people are being weeded out. It's that only some people self-select to pursue it to this degree.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the thing that probably one of the other pieces of the pie for me from a feminist perspective is, why has it been pushed to the side? And, this idea of personal insight over communal authority or orthodox teachings around salvation is a piece of it for sure. But then, you know, also that enlightenment is attainable or achievable by the individual, that, as you said, they don't have to go through this communal structure or the church authority. I can't say that. But also the fact that women are presented in a more egalitarian way, that uh, it doesn't really fit the patriarchal structure as well. So,
Absolutely. I mean, life is politics. It's hard to be human and get away from politics. And, it didn't fit the narrative that the church wanted to tell. And that doesn't mean that the narrative the church is telling is wrong by any stretch, but there's more to the story. There's more to
right,
the story. And, things become threatening, right? And especially when, it's so meditative and contemplative and metaphorical and mystical. And our core Christianity, in my opinion, doesn't spend a lot of time in the mystical. They just don't. You have to work for it. You have to find your own tribe that's there and wants to play. I'm not an expert, but Kabbalah in the Jewish tradition, you get to after years and years and years of study. Kabbalah is the mystical arm of Judaism, and celebrities like to just jump right up into Kabbalah, but the people that I know that are Orthodox that follow, and are, committed, they're working and earning their, learning, I should say, their way to that more mystical
they're
realm.
they're they're not just putting on the red string bracelet and saying and
They're
flaunting it
not.
around.
They're not, right? And
It's
so I
amazing.
think, it's easier just to kind of play at the lower level.
Yeah,
It's just easier, right?
it requires a lot less of us for sure.
Yeah, right. Right. So that's a lot of why I love it. And I think it just really speaks to the way my brain and my heart are wired. I'm just wired a little bit
Hmm.
to the left and a little bit more Eastern. And you know, it just, like I said, it just speaks to me in ways that the canonicals don't. And again, not that I don't appreciate and spend time there as well, but um yeah.
Well, but hey, before we go, I'd love to talk a little bit about this, exposure that India had to this early Christian theology through Thomas. So there is still, this strain of Christianity in India that is this referred to as the St. Thomas Christian. So um, he arrived historically. Um, Stories say that he arrived in India through a port. He preached the gospel along the Malabar coast. He founded 7 churches during that time period. And then he was martyred, I don't know, about roughly 20 years after he arrived. And I had to know, because I'm like, what does that mean? evidently he death by spear. That doesn't sound like the way I would want to go, but I think a lot of those early Christians, there was a lot of martyrdom happening. But some of the details are debated, but it is an extremely old tradition. It's very embedded in the identity of in Eastern Indian Christians. And so I think I'm going to totally mispronounce this. Kerala, I believe is how it's pronounced, is kind of the center of that community. And then there's this tie to Syriac Christian liturgy. Is that how you say that?
Mm-hmm.
There's this deep tie to the West Asian churches, and that I was like, it's this the fact that the Church of the East was based in Mesopotamia/Syria. So they prayed in Syriac, they used Syriac liturgy, they had bishops sent from this area. So there's this interesting cultural connection, geographic connection between this Mesopotamia area and where Thomas was active in India, and how those two things connect together, that I thought from purely a historical perspective was pretty interesting, because it aligns with ancient trade routes and this idea that Syrian, Persian, and Jewish merchants were regularly going to the Malabar coast, and that is how, that we think often of Christianity and expansion to the west, but how quickly it also expanded to the east, very early on as well. So I thought that whole history lesson was interesting, in that, in Syria, there is still this shared devotion to St. Thomas, and then you see this connection in India similarly, and it all centers on this same mythical historical figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And same with Jesus, right? Isa, the way they
Mm-hmm.
refer to him. So it's, fascinating. It's really fascinating. I agree.
Yeah, and that there's denominational divisions today, but still those churches exist. And so interesting to see how it morphs and stays rooted in certain cultures.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just thought that whole, I had not thought about those connection points in terms of geography or culture before.
Yeah. I think one of the things that gives God the best giggle is denominations. I think he just sits there and just giggles. Just absolutely giggles, Ugh.
Yeah, well, and we've talked a lot about, as I would be classified as a non-believer, by most Christians, but also what I find faith in is the commonality across not only Christian traditions, because in many cases there's more in common than there are differences, but
Yeah.
also across all the major religions there is a lot of commonality. So
Yeah.
yes, we tend to get stuck mired in the details for sure.
Well, especially when you get into the mystical realm, whether it's
Mm,
Sufi, Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, right? Then the differences break away way more. They just fall off.
yes,
And it's so much easier to see the connective tissue across what seem like very, very diverse philosophies and ideologies and theologies. So, yeah.
agreed. Yeah,
Well, I hope,
because
go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, because we tend to try to be a lot of people tend to try to be very literal about, some specific interpretations. And I think in some ways it's almost like how you stake out your identity in high school. Bear with me. This little distinction is like, these are my people,
Right.
and, and really there's so much when you get down to the base that is very unifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had, because I'm starting to train for the Camino. And
Yes.
was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago? We met with the priest who's going to take us on that. He was in town, and he lives in Portugal now. But, and he was going like, we talked about all the logistics and the training and the walking and all, how the days will go and blah, blah, blah. And then we moved into like the more, religious / spiritual aspect of it. And he's asking everybody, what faith are you? What faith are you? And we get to me and the whole table starts laughing. And he's like, what? And they're like, tell him what you are, you know? And I was like, okay, well, today I'm a Celtic Buddhist Franciscan Lutheran. And he just, bursts out laughing, and I'm like, he's like, well, we're going to have lots to talk about. Right. Because, and it goes back to this whole point of there's so much, so much similarity. It's like, why do I have to pick? Why do I have to pick? So,
Yes. Yes. Well, I can't remember if have we talked about the offsite or the meeting that I helped facilitate several years ago. So I have a
oh,
friend
was
who's
this the retreat?
yeah, it was
Yeah.
the retreat.
Yeah.
Okay.
But let's
Yeah.
talk about it. Talk about it.
Well, so I showed up to facilitate it. I had a friend who is a minister, Disciples of Christ minister, and really just off the cuff said, "Hey, what are you up to this weekend?" She said, "Actually, I've got all these people coming in. We're doing this retreat. We, have a former nun who served in the Vatican, and she's been doing this thing, and we've kind of partnered up on some content online. And then we have, this person who has created this space and isn't sure what to do with it, but she wants it to be a spiritual place for gathering. And then there were all these different stakeholders who were coming together to try to figure out, are we banding together? What do we want to do? Like, how do we put some of this in action?" And I said, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. Who's going to be, kind of leading the discussion?" And she said, "I don't know. We just agreed to all come together and talk." And I said, "Well, this is kind of what I do for a living, obviously very different topics. But if you want someone to just guide discussion, take notes, say, I think I'm hearing you say this. Is this what you mean?" I'd be happy to join. And it would be interesting for me because this is so far out of my realm. And she said, "Yeah, come join us." And so I showed up. And when I arrived, everyone else was already there. And I was a little intimidated because these are people who are, ministers, um, you know, who have served in a lot of religious capacities, missionaries, like I said, a former nun who served in the Vatican. She had a fascinating life story.
I bet.
And so they all introduced themselves and kind of gave their creds a little bit. And then it got to me, and I said, "Well, this is who I am. Here's why I'm here. And I'm way less Jesus-y than you guys." So, and one of the men said, "What, you have a tattoo on the inside of your wrist?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "What does it say?" And I said, "Blessed." And he said, "I think you're one of us."
That's so awesome. That's
It was pretty
great.
funny. And
Great.
it was a great weekend. It was very interesting.
I love
You
it.
know,
Just
yeah,
having that mental candy to talk to people who want to talk about the topic makes me
yes,
so happy. This makes me so
yes.
happy. I don't expect everyone has to answer their own call, and it is not for me to judge their call. I just love talking about the topic. I don't care what you believe. Like, let's talk about it.
Well, and people who view the world differently even have a different language. I mean, they all spoke to varying degrees this language that was not familiar to me, but very interesting, and I learned a ton. And it was a it was a really enlightening and, impactful weekend for me in terms of hearing them talk about their journeys and what they wanted to put out into the world, and hearing their perspective as people who focused on this almost all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I bet that was amazing.
Yeah.
We need a weekend like that. Let's find a weekend like that.
All right, deal. We'll make it
Well,
happen.
thank you for reading the Gospel of Thomas. I appreciate
Yeah,
you jumping into new pools with me on this one.
absolutely. It was very interesting. And I feel like I've only scratched the surface for sure. So there are probably pieces of it that I'll go back and revisit, to your point, ruminate on a little bit more.
Yeah, it sticks with you. Thomas is sticky.
Yes, yes.
Stick.
And there are other Gnostic gospels that maybe we'll tackle at some other point.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, I was a big fan of Elaine Pagels for a while, and so I think I've read almost all of her works. And yeah, so you pick the next one, sister. Well, I'll dive into I'll dive into whichever you would like.
All right. Well, thanks for bringing it to my attention. I think
First one's
this
free.
discussion is the very essence of Sacredish. So
That's
I love
right.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will see you soon.
All
Thanks.
right. Sounds good. See ya.
Bye.